Culture change must be effortless. It cannot rely on willpower, motivation, or attention because those things will run out after a short period of time.
Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Helping People Perform. Delighted to be joined today by another member of the Solopreneurs Club, someone who has been inspiring me in some of the work that he's been doing in the world of culture. We have director from Click Culture. Welcome to the show today, Matt Furness.
Thanks so much, Paul. That's very kind. And I've really been looking forward to having this conversation. So thanks for having me.
Oh, really looking forward to this because I think there's so much we can learn. But I really want to start off with, what's your background and why this focus on culture?
Yeah, sure. So I'll answer the background piece first and give you a potted history to me. So my background is as a business psychologist initially. So I studied psychology at the University of Bath and then occupational psychology in Birkbeck. And for the last 10 years or so, I've been working in people, leadership, culture development. First, I was doing it as a consultant at a business that was called Lane 4. And then I spent a couple of years as a senior manager at EY. After that, during that time, in fact, I've been really lucky to work with probably well over 100 businesses now across loads of different sectors. And then I left EY at the start of 2023 to start Click, which is a specialist culture and behavior change consultancy. I called it Click because at the time, I was noticing loads of businesses promising to reinvent, transform, unlock, unleash, reinvent.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, Paul, it all just felt like utter nonsense to me, just like a load of buzzwords. And for me, it felt like a bit of a hero complex. And the funniest thing of it all, right, is I've never had a client or a person who said to me, Matt, can you reinvent our future, please? Can you transform us? Can you transform me? They don't want that. They've just got these problems, right? These complex problems, and they just want solutions that help them with those problems. They just want solutions that click. And that's why I called Click. For me, it's about wanting to break down, get rid of all the buzzwords and just be really straightforward about what is the issues that we're facing and what's the most pragmatic, simple way of approaching those. And then remind me what the second bit of the question was, Paul.
So why the focus on culture? You've worked in all of these businesses. What is it about culture that has driven you to focus in that area?
So I would say there are three reasons. The first reason is because I feel like we're facing a culture crisis. So I might not get these statistics exactly spot on, but according to Gallup, 51% of people globally are seeking new jobs. 77% of people globally are disengaged at work. Disengagement is expected to cost, I think, somewhere between $8 and $9 trillion per year. And it's almost like culture has become the hallmark of big businesses. When I talk to any family member or a friend, they always say something along the lines of like, do you know what? You'd have a field day in our business. It's like it's just become expected that culture gets in the way of sort of personal and business performance for so many. So that's the first reason. Like we're facing a culture crisis, right? The second problem is that what I'm noticing is that businesses are investing loads of time, money, and effort in culture, but efforts just aren't working. So what's happening is they're investing all this time, and what they'll do at best is create this short-term momentum, but they won't be creating long-term change. And so what that means is people are having to invest more and more time and money in culture because their efforts are only having these short-term effects. And it's become this like vicious cycle. One study, again, to cite a statistic that I might not have got spot on, but I think it's just something like 81% of culture change fails, which is more, when it was looking at all the different types of business change, it was more than any other type of business change.
Right.
So what then happens is senior leaders, I think most senior leaders get that culture has become important now, but they don't genuinely believe that you can change it. They get skeptical. So HR aren't respected as genuine enablers of performance, and then their
Right.
budget and their resource are cut. So that's the second reason. There's this big problem, but what we're doing isn't working. The
Right.
third and final reason is I feel like the support available to businesses isn't giving businesses what they need. And I touched on this a minute ago with the comment about why I called click. So when I'm looking at the market, consultancies tend to fall into one of two camps, right? Camp one is consultancies who do everything under the sun, right? And then they also say they do culture. And my question here is, can you really be a jack of all trades and then also miraculously, simultaneously, a master of culture? For me,
Right.
I just feel a little bit skeptical, right? They're generalists, not specialists. The second group of consultancies that I saw was consultancies who say they do culture, but actually they just do a slither of culture. So I see this a lot, with leadership development businesses, as an example. They might do leadership development and then call themselves a culture consultancy, but culture is impacted by a lot more than just the skills and mindsets of your leaders, right? That is just one of various other things that will impact culture. So by focusing on that area, you're only ever going to have a limited impact on culture. So there's actually a real lack of consultancies who are specialist culture and behavior change consultancies per se, as opposed to one of those two camps that I just described. So to summarize, I guess, big culture problem, impacting loads of businesses, having a massive impact on the bottom line. What we're doing at the moment isn't working, and I don't think the support out there is giving businesses what they actually need to solve those problems.
Yeah, yeah. So I've seen it in the work that I do as well. It's this desire to have a great culture. So many businesses will say, "Oh, we really want to drive our culture, and that'll be the thing that moves us forward." And then you start asking the questions as to, okay, so what are you doing to do that? What are you doing that's going to actually move the dial and shift your company culture in the direction that you want it to as well, which is another question in its own right. But you mentioned there about 80% or that sort of number of culture initiatives are failing. What's your experience? What's your opinion on why that is? What are some of the key reasons?
Yeah, so I think let me start with a story about a big telecoms business that I recently worked with. So over the years, they've rolled out loads of training programs, and then I was working with them recently on leadership development piece of work, and they said, Matt, this time it needs to be different. This time behavior really needs to stick. So gently prodding, I was like, well, okay, great, I hear that. Good, good idea. What are you sure then that training is the right way to go? Because if you've done that time and time again and it's not worked, then are we sure that's the right way to go, right? But they said to me, well, by this point, it's too late. We've got sign-off from senior leaders. We've committed to this. Now, will this time be different? It's impossible to say. But honestly, I doubt it. And for me, this story beautifully captures the status quo. The industry has become aware that what it's doing isn't working, right? They realize that they've tried time and time again and behavior never sticks. And yet, the only thing that is happening is we're making tweaks to these traditional methods of changing culture instead of returning completely, going back to the drawing board and going, if we were to start again, how would we try to change culture instead of reverting back to these same old methods that we've always used, right? It's that whole thing of if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. It's that, right? But that's why culture change keeps failing, because we're expecting different results, right? I think that's also how like insanity is defined, right? So we're basically reverting back to training, leadership development, comms, values and behaviors, engagement scans, the same methods, and expecting different results. So what I did recently is I felt quite pissed off about this. I felt frustrated by it. And I was like, do you know what? There must be better ways to shift culture. So I went back to the drawing board, and this isn't an exaggeration. I spent months collating hundreds of studies on behavior change and culture change. And I was trying to ask myself the question of, if we were to start again, if you knew nothing about, how the industry currently approaches culture change, how would we do it? How would we actually get people to change their behavior and get the organization's culture to change? And in the depths of that research, I realized that the industry is making some pretty colossal mistakes. And also, I found some better ways of shifting company culture, ways that will create longer lasting impact for less time, money, and effort. So, to summarize, I feel like the reason that rate is so high is because we're doing the same thing and just expecting different results. And, we know that that's nonsense, but I think we're still continuing to do it.
So you mentioned there about things like training, leadership development, comms. Now, these are all still very important things, aren't they? We've got to have that in place in order to keep our business running, even as part of something to move us forward. But what's this better approach? What are some of the lessons that you learned from that research about what gives us better results when we're trying to seek that performance?
Yeah, and you're spot on, by the way. What I don't want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater here. There is a time for training and there is a time for comms.
Yeah.
However, at the moment, we're relying on it. We're relying on them, and we're using those as the default option, as opposed to really thinking, given the challenge that the cultural behavior problem that we've got at the moment, are those the right thing to do? We're just sort of defaulting to them. So the problem with traditional methods, if you think about all of those things I just mentioned, so training, comms, values, surveys, etc., they all focus on one of two things. One is giving people skills, like training.
Yep.
Or two is motivating people to change their behavior, or a combination of the two. Like a lot of training is about giving people the right skills and then trying to motivate them to change their behavior. And then at the end of training, for argument's sake, you'll ask, what are you going to commit to doing differently? Now, there is an implicit assumption here that people will act differently if they have the right skills and they feel motivated to change.
Okay.
The problem is that is not how human beings behave. Knowing better does not mean doing better. Hundreds of studies, thousands, I think, actually, have reported a remarkably weak relationship between what we can do and what we intend to do and what we actually do. Academics refer to it as the intention behavior gap. So even if we give people the right skills and we motivate them to act differently, it's unlikely to change their behavior. And the funny thing is, right, like our lived experience shows this too. So how many times have you committed to change your behavior, like New Year's resolutions or going on a diet or going to the gym? And, you can do it. You have the skills to do it and you want to do it, but you don't, right? And the reason for that is because the barrier to behavior change is rarely a lack of skill or motivation. Right. In the moments where it is, training and comms, they're a really good option, right? Because it's the lack of skill that is preventing people from changing their behavior. But most of the time, people aren't acting the way they want to act or the way the business might want them to act because of the F word. That F word is friction. I bet you thought I was going to swear there. The F word is friction, right? So what I mean by that is the right thing to do is rarely the easiest thing to do. So that creates a type of friction, right? We can only overcome that friction by investing effort, by investing in attention and willpower. And we can do that in the short term, right? So, 1st of January, New Year's resolution. Yeah, I'm going to the gym. 2nd of January, going to the gym. 3rd of January. But the problem, right, is that willpower and attention are limited. Right. We have limited amounts of effort that we can continually invest. Unfortunately, we're not like these rational supercomputers who can just make the right decisions every day. And, we get stressed, we get tired, we get busy. We only have a certain number of cognitive resources. And that's
Yeah.
why traditional methods will create short-term momentum but not long-term change, because their impact is reliant on willpower and attention, which will always run out after a few days or weeks. So as soon as we get tired, busy, stressed, things will go back to the way that they were before. So academics call it, use this term, the triangular relapse pattern. It basically means like you have a starting point, then you improve, you go up, and then attentional
Yep.
willpower runs out, and then things go back to the way they were, and they go back down, right? So the truth is, culture change will never last if it relies on people's conscious, rational decision making, which relies on willpower, attention, conscious thought. That's the problem.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, I've written down a few things here, and I've heard the so you mentioned the intention behavior gap. In previous lives, I've sort of referred to that as the knowing doing gap. You know what you should be doing, but you're not doing it. And yeah, those elements of it's the human behavioral aspect of this that really is the key. So, what's what is the key? How do we unlock this? How do we click this open?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and I think let me quickly share what I don't think the answer is, which I think a lot of other people are doing. And then
Right,
I will share the alternative as well. Just so I think it's important to sort of address that bit first. So
right,
what a lot of people are doing is they recognize this. So what they're doing is they're creating these increasingly evocative, once in a lifetime type learning experiences, right? So they're
right,
taking people off to an island, or they're treating them to time with a Michelin star chef, and then doing a debrief around it. And those things, like, they're great, they're admirable, and they'll promise an awesome day out. They'll give people a really memorable experience. The problem, though, is that they'll suffer the same fate, because behavior change still relies on those limited pools of willpower and attention. So to use a
right,
metaphor, think about like a wind-up toy, right? No matter how hard you twist, the momentum will always fade after time. So I just want to firstly say those immersive, evocative learning experiences, they have a place. They're great for like talent engagement, things like that. But they're not the answer to long-term behavior change.
right,
A better place to start is to understand what we do when we run out of willpower and attention. So the funny thing that behavior science shows us is that as a species, we've learned to automate our behavior for these moments where we're not thinking, basically. We go on autopilot, and what we do is we revert back to the actions that in a similar situation have given us some form of rewards.
right.
So we call in academic terms, these are what we call habits, and they reflect, there was a study in 2009, and it's estimated that we're on autopilot about 43% of this time, right,
Wow.
of our day, right? So we're not
Yeah.
thinking about what we're doing, we're on autopilot, and we're performing these habitual behaviors. Now, people think that habits are just things that you do day after day, but that's not true. The difference is that habits are automatic. They're what we do when we're not thinking.
Right.
They don't rely on our conscious attention. And so because of that, they can be sustained over time. They're not relying on that willpower and that attention, right? And what happens is when behavior becomes habitual, it shifts from the newer parts of the brain, at the front of the brain, to that require energy and focus and time and willpower, to the more like primitive parts of our brain that can operate effortlessly without attention.
Right.
And the amazing thing, right, is people who consistently act in productive, healthy ways don't have this bottom. We shouldn't be looking at them going, God, they're just really motivated. They have this bottomless willpower. Motivation's actually overrated. They've just learned to make the behavior that they want to perform an effortless habit. So they do it, whether they're busy, stressed, and tired. They'll do it anyway. And those habits have even become self-sustaining. So what the research suggests is that good habits are as bad to break as old ones. So
Right.
they've just learned to automate the right behaviors. James Clear wrote about it in a nice way. He said, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So the conditions that you create around you and the habits that you build in are the systems. So when you fall back onto them, you're still doing the right thing.
Right.
So the point here, right, is we need a paradigm shift. Instead of maximizing motivation and skill, we need to minimize the amount of effort required to do the right thing. For culture change and behavior change to last, the right behavior must become the easiest option. It must be the behavior that people default to, even when they're busy, stressed, and tired. And that is how we'll make it to last. We'll make it last. So to put it another way, it's not about making us better when we're at our best. It's actually about making us better when we're at our worst.
Right.
And the problem is that all those traditional methods that I described, like they won't do that, because they're just assuming that people are these sort of conscious, rational people. So we've got to apply a completely new science, which I can talk about in a minute, but I'll pause for water because I've been jabbering on for the last few minutes.
No, that's fantastic stuff, because I think this whole bit of it's not about motivation. I love that element of motivation being overrated, because we all know, and I think we all reflect on when the proverbial has hit the fan. What do? We revert. We go back to the easiest thing that we know, and that is the easiest thing, the least friction, as you mentioned, to get that done. So how do we actually make that work in practice? What's the approach, and how does it work in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we do it is we need to apply the new science of habits and automatic behavior. And that science has been built at university like Harvard, Yale, and Cambridge over the last 10, 20 years. And it's even been summarized in best-selling books like Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, by Nudge, by Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler. This stuff isn't secret, and it's even gained enough traction for Kahneman and Thaler to both win Nobel Prizes for their research on how we make subconscious decisions and how we change habits. And even better, it's not just that people have written about it and studied it academically. Like, it's been applied already in other contexts. Like, people are there's a nudge. The government have a nudge unit, right, which is basically focused on applying this science to change people's behavior in public policy. It's been changed. It's been applied to lifestyle apps. A guy I used to work with lost some like over 5 stone by using this app that basically uses this science and applies it to dieting. It's also used quite a lot in consumer marketing. So this science is being applied. It just hasn't been applied to the culture change industry yet. So that's what Click is doing, right? And that's what I'm wanting to bring to the culture change industry. So it's basically comes through applying that science. The way that you do that is you need to think about how you make behavior become an effortless habit. And what behavioral science shows is that behavior becomes effortless when 4 conditions are met. So firstly, the behavior must feel obvious. So it must be continuously triggered by something, usually in your external environment, like it might be a person, it might be a time, but something triggers your behavior. So it's not reliant on you like consciously thinking about it. Second thing, it needs to be appealing. So just doing it, you might make it fun, you might make it enjoyable. You need to make the actual action, an enjoyable thing to do. Third thing is it needs to be easy. So it needs to require as little energy as possible to do. And then fourthly, it needs to be rewarding. So doing that thing must lead to a reward or prevent a punishment. So the way that you apply this science is you purposefully nurture those 4 conditions at 3 levels. So firstly, at an organizational level, secondly, at a team level, and then finally at a personal level. So at an organizational level, if you think about the conditions that span teams, regions, departments, they'll impact the largest number of people, right? And some of these conditions are in HR's control. So like things in the employee life cycle. And loads of HR teams already do this to some extent. It's about embedding the values or behaviors or whatever your desired culture is, so they are continuously embedded into the bloodstream of your organization through recruitment, through reward, through recognition, and so on. But equally, embedding it within I think systems and processes that drive people's behavior that sit outside the remit of HR.
Right.
So this could be technology, it could be business goals, it could be processes, it could be governance. I work with one business who they wanted to become much more dynamic and entrepreneurial, but every time you got sign off, you had to go to your boss's boss.
Right.
So the process was at odds with the culture you wanted to create, therefore creating friction, therefore making it the harder thing to do. Right. So the easy thing to do there is you need to change the process. Simple as that. You don't need to send everyone on a training course about, coaching leadership and blah, 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 blah. That might help sometimes. But if that's not the source of the problem, if the source of the problem isn't about leadership skill, it's actually about the wrong process, you need to change the process.
Yeah.
So that's the first level, organizational. Second level is a team level. So what I tend to find, right, is organizations will create these lofty values or behaviors, a big picture, and then they'll just go, okay, managers, leaders, go.
Right.
And these managers are expected to miraculously cascade them in their team and make them live, but it doesn't work like that. And the team leader or your managers and leaders have the ability and the responsibility to make those behaviors the most obvious, appealing, easy, and rewarded things to do by tweaking things like team rituals, team processes, how they do one-to-ones, team charters, storytelling. They have all these different tools at their fingertips, and the challenge there is giving people. This is where training comes in handy. Giving team leaders and managers the skill and the ability to foster those conditions at their team, to therefore translate the culture that you want to see into a team environment that basically makes those behaviors inevitable and makes them effortless.
Okay.
The final level, then, just before I shut up, is the personal level, right? So there's an analogy that's used in the culture change industry or in training, where it's like you take the fish out of the water, you clean the fish, and then you put the fish back in, and you expect, but the water's dirty, so the fish is still going to get ill. It goes something like that. And the point that metaphor is trying to make is that you need, training won't fix these systemic problems. And whilst I agree with the point it's making, the difference is that fish can't change the environment around them. People can. Right. So what we can do is we can teach people this science of habits. We can help them to foster the conditions around them to then make it as easy as possible for them to do the right thing. And a lot of us do this already to some extent. And it's used a lot in dieting, for example. If you buy smaller plates, you're more likely to eat smaller meals, right? You have designed the environment around you to drive the behavior you want to see. And the best part of this, right, is that these habits and these conditions you create for yourself, they all rely on this same 4-step loop, which has been documented, by plenty. This isn't a new idea, right? Yeah. But once you understand that 4-step loop, you can change any habit, whether it's delegation, coaching, giving feedback, whatever the behavior is that's stopping you from contributing in a positive way to the culture and from role modeling behaviors you want to see, you can change those habitually, right? So in response to your point earlier around skills training, what I suggest is combining skills training with habit hacking. So you give people the skills that they need, if those are the issue, and then you give them the knowledge and know-how on how to hack their habits so that they habitually apply these skills, and so they stand the test of time, as opposed to them just fading out as soon as they lose their attention or willpower, which will probably happen as soon as they get busy, stressed, or tired.
Yeah, I mean, some amazing stuff in there, and I think there's this element of making it as easy as possible to do the right thing, and the focus on being better when we're at our worst. I think those
Yes.
two of the things I scribbled down there, because those two really hit home with me, and I'm sure they hit home with a lot of the audiences. This
I hope
isn't
so.
about you can train people to be really, really good. And I worked in the world of F1, and you look at those F1 drivers and the high performing individuals, the high performing teams.
Mm-mm.
And yes, they're training to be at their very best, but it's actually when the pressure's on, and
Yes,
that's the bit that makes the difference. And
absolutely.
applied to culture, where, as you say, we already know that has a huge impact on the business. Then
Mm,
this seems like a real leverage point that you've hit on here. So some amazing
yeah,
stuff going there.
thank
So
you.
what's the value then? What's the value
Yeah,
of this approach?
yeah. So what I'm calling this approach effortless culture change, because as I've said, culture change to last, culture change can't rely on effort. It can't rely on willpower and attention. It needs to be effortless. So I would say the benefits of effortless culture change are fourfold. Firstly, obviously, it will create longer lasting impact because you're not relying on these short term boosts of motivation and willpower. Second is you'll save time, money, and effort. So you won't need to keep investing time and time again in that vicious cycle of short
Right.
term solution, short term boost, then it runs out, repeat.
Yeah.
Um, the third benefit I think is you reduce the reliance on skeptics, right? So often when I talk to a lot of HR leaders, they say something like, we're just trying to get these people on board and it's wasting loads of time and effort. And the fact is, right, there will always be skeptics in a business who want to change but won't invest effort in actually making that change happen.
Mm.
And the approach that I've described here bypasses that to some extent, right?
Right.
The fourth one is it goes back to what I was saying right at the start of our conversation, right? Like this can build a lot more respect and credibility, but not only because it's a more impactful way of doing culture change, but also because you're actually avoiding a lot of the sort of like touchy feely stuff, like that many people hate. You're
Yeah.
not talking about how people feel about stuff, or like you're just going, right, what's the behavior? How do we create the conditions around them to make that just the activity with which there's least friction? It
Mm.
makes it a science, not this touchy feely thing. Now, I sort of hate this whole thing of like, I don't like it when people talk about like soft skills and stuff like that because they're not soft, but many people do, and that's important. And we can spend loads of time trying to convince them. But I just think this is an alternative way of getting around that, right? And therefore building credibility and respect for what it is that a lot of great HR leaders and practitioners do.
So I mean, some real science behind what's going on here, and some real thinking about, and as you said earlier on in the episode, going back to the drawing board and going, what's not working, what's a different way we can do this, and actually, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here either. The answers are out there. It's just the
Yeah.
application. And yeah, it sounds like you're doing some amazing work in this, because I actually did an episode of the Helping You Perform sort of podcast series, the short version of this, where I talked to camera on reframing laziness as efficiency of effort. And I think
Yes.
reflecting back on that, laziness, we'll all be lazy at some point in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll be particularly lazy cognitively when we're
Yeah.
under pressure. And
Yes.
so, how do we tap into that laziness to make the most of it? And I think
Exactly. When
I
I,
love
when I
it.
was talking to someone about it, we talked about how do you make laziness work for you? Because at the
Mm.
moment, it's almost like we're in denial. We're like, no, like, this time it will be different. This time it's not going to be like, come on, let's get real. Let's be honest. It's not going to be different. Instead of going, oh no, we're just not going to be lazy this time, actually recognizing as a race,
Mm.
when tired, when busy, when stressed, we follow the path of least resistance, and just using that laziness to our advantage, right?
Mm.
That's what the top performers are doing. They've just made the thing they want to do the easiest option, the thing that they go to the gym because if they didn't, it would just feel weird now.
Right.
It would just feel like at odds with who they are and how they see themselves, and they can't bear to do that.
Yeah.
So they'll go.
Yeah. Oh, really loving this, and I'm sure we could talk for hours on this. But I've got a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you around.
Yeah, sure.
If you could help any team or individual or organization
Yeah.
with this skill set that you've got and with this approach that you're taking, who would you
Yeah.
want that to be?
It's a good question. The HR leader or business leader who is refusing mediocrity, the person who's not sort of drunk the Kool-Aid and gone, oh yeah, everything's fine. Someone who is actually realistic about the state of the culture change industry and is genuinely looking for new and more impactful ways
Right.
of of changing behavior and changing culture, you know.
Yeah.
I think in terms of like the type of business that they would be in, actually, I don't have a strong view. I think typically it'll be a medium to large size business. It will probably be a HR leader, you know, like a HR director, head of culture type, head of people type role. Yeah.
So someone who's really got that ambition, can see that things can be better. They just
Yeah.
need a bit of help, need some acceleration, something to help them click. There you
Yes,
go.
absolutely. Spot on.
And if you were able to sit down and have a drink, have a meal with somebody that you think you would leave that conversation going, wow, I've learned so much, and my own
Yeah.
performance has been uplifted, who would you want that to be?
I always find these questions really hard. It's like the ones around, you know, if you had dinner with three people, and all I can think of is Jesus. And then I'm thinking, oh no, I can't say something that everyone else says. So I think. So I used to be a bit of a nerd for like ancient history and philosophy, and I would probably go with Socrates. Now, what most people don't realize about Socrates is, look, I see loads of people quote him, but the thing is, Socrates never wrote anything down, ever.
Right.
The only knowledge we ever have of Socrates has come through Plato, who was basically his student, who then just wrote down a lot of things that Socrates supposedly may have said, but you're never going to know, right? But the reason Socrates didn't write anything down was because he believed that if you write something down, and I see this on LinkedIn, you can't have a conversation about it. You know, it's set in stone, and then someone will just find a hole in the knowledge. And he also believed that he didn't know anything. He's famous for having said something that like along the lines of "all I know is that I know nothing" or something like that. And what he was trying to get at is that we believe we know all of these things, but we don't. They're just varying levels of belief about things.
Right.
So the reason that I would talk to Socrates is because of this sort of philosophical stance that he had about the world and not having know anything. He never gave advice.
Right.
So what he did was he and this is where the term the Socratic method came from.
Right.
He basically just asked you questions. He asked people questions. So the reason he got put to death is because he was basically just like going up to people and these rich, powerful people and saying like, you know, how would you define courage? And then they would say something, and then he would ask them another question until it was clear that they couldn't actually define what they were saying they could define. And what he was trying to do there is just go, see, you don't know as much as you thought you did, right? Now, the reason that I would want to talk to him, I think, is because I just think he'd be a really good coach, a great business coach. I would say, here's what I'm doing with my business, and I'm trying to do X, Y, Z. And then he's become famous for asking such powerful questions that it gets you to a certain, another level that I don't think I would get to if I met someone and they would just give me advice. Right. So yeah, bit of an interest, bit of a different answer, but I don't know if everything I've just said is historically and factually accurate, but that's what I'm saying at the moment.
That would be quite literally the ultimate practitioner of the Socratic method. Then,
yes, exactly. Yeah, coached by Socrates,
and not the 1980s Brazilian footballer either.
No. I mean he can have a go as well, but I think he'd probably be better at teaching me how to use my left foot than. Right. Teach me how to build a business or whatever it is that I want coaching on.
Brilliant. So if we were to leave the audience with one sort of key lesson from today, one key point, what would that be?
Culture change must be effortless. It cannot rely on willpower, motivation, or attention, because those things will run out after a short period of time.
Brilliant. And just that in itself is fantastic for us to think about. And built into that the knowledge that there is another way, and it's something
Yes.
that certainly yourself can support with as well. So maybe let's wrap it up with, how do people find out more if they want to know more about Click Culture, they want to know more about Effortless Culture Change? How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. So, well, I've written a 5-point manifesto outlining everything that I've described here. So I'm posting that shortly on LinkedIn. So if you find me on LinkedIn and you just want to read that, that'll be on my featured section.
Right.
Alternatively, if you just want to connect, let's connect. If you want to chat, just DM me, and I suggest we go from there. My name's Matt Furness, Furness. As I was saying to you before this conversation, I don't know if it's finesse or furnace, but hey ho.
Well, fantastic. Well, we'll make sure we've got that those links in to the show notes so that people can
that'd be great. Thank you.
click and go straight there. And I think I'll also put some links in there to some of the amazing books and resources that you've mentioned as well, so that people can go and find out more for themselves and do some research on their own right.
Great.
So, Matt,
Awesome.
this has been fascinating, and I love your whole approach to what you're doing here. The fact that you are taking something that is so big and going right back to basics, going to where the knowledge is and saying, right, this is a new way of doing things that's actually going to get results. So I applaud you for that. And thanks so much for being on the show today, Matt Furness.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for letting me yap on at you for almost 40 minutes now. So thanks, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Matt.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review, and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.